So, Janthir Wilds has been out for a couple of weeks now, and the expansion added a new land spear weapon for every single class. Spear has always been available as an underwater weapon, but now we can finally use it on land. Some of the spears are ranged weapons, some are melee weapons, and some are even hybrid weapons. It is the first time that we have ever gotten a new land weapon type, so a lot of us were pretty excited. But are these spears actually any good? In the past couple of weeks, I made it my personal goal to try all 9 new spears. I wanted to know if the weapons were fun to use, but also how powerful they were. And well, trying all the spears, it definitely took me a while. I kept getting distracted working on my homesteads. Homesteads highlights video coming up soon. Definitely subscribe. 3 weeks in, I have now finally tried all the spears and I am ready to share my thoughts. Let's review all 9 Janthir Wilds spears. Starting off with some general thoughts. The previous expansion, Secrets of the Obscure, also gave every class a new weapon. I enjoyed these weapons quite a bit, but some of them definitely felt a little bit familiar. There were a lot of reused animations from older weapons, and I don't think that's necessarily a huge issue, but the new spears don't have this problem at all. Pretty much every single animation feels entirely new, and it makes these weapons feel really fresh and different. Almost half of these solo weapons were also support weapons. As an avid raider, I quite enjoyed this, but some people were definitely a little bit disappointed. You don't see that many people running around in the open world with the Revenant heal scepter or the Engineer heal shortbow. But this time, every single spear can be used as a DPS weapon. This definitely helps these weapons have more mainstream appeal. These skill icons are once again gorgeous, and most weapons have their own mechanic or minigame. This makes the spear a lot more interesting than just 5 skills on a bar, but in my opinion, it can sometimes be a little bit difficult to keep track of what's going on. You have to look at these really tiny little buffs on your massive buff bar. This was also a problem with some of the solo weapons, and unfortunately it is still present here. ArenaNet, it's really time for a buff bar rework. But in general, my impressions of the new spears is very positive. Next, let's talk about each spear. Starting with Elementalist. This is by far the spear that I played the most, because whenever there's a new expansion, my first playthrough is always on my Ellie. I really like this weapon. It is fully ranged and its power, and that's something Ellie mains have been requesting for years. Staff kind of fills this role, but it's fallen behind a bit. The way this weapon works is you put down an etching with skill 5, and you can then charge it up by casting skills while standing inside of it. If you cast 3 skills, you fully charge up your etching, and then you can unleash a massive attack. Like for example, Volcano or Haboob. These skills look amazing, and the visual effects team really did a fantastic job. I am a little bit concerned though that they might be a little bit too flashy. I think this minigame is a lot of fun, and I like it a lot more than Sodo's Ellie pistol minigame. It's pretty easy to execute while also feeling very satisfying. The skills on this spear also follow a set pattern. Skill 2 is for example always a damagey skill, and skill 3 is always utility. At first, I thought this might mean that the weapon might lose some variety, but it actually makes it a lot easier to learn. Because well, memorizing 20 unique skills can be pretty overwhelming. The spear is pretty strong in PvE. There are some really high DPS benchmarks out there, and the rotation is pretty fluid. But there is a pretty major problem. Apparently Volcano, one of your hardest hitting skills, doesn't damage certain bosses. I don't really understand why, but I think it's got something to do with the way some boss platforms are designed. Let's hope ArenaNet fixes this soon. Apart from this bug, Ellie's spear is super fun and super strong. It's exactly what I wanted. Next, let's talk about the Necromancer spear. This is a melee power damage weapon, which means it's got quite a bit of existing necro weapons to compete with. I'm actually a little bit sad we didn't get a dedicated necro healer weapon, but the spear we got is pretty cool. Just like the Ellie spear, this weapon has its very own mini-game. Your skills build up these soul shards, which you can then spend by using perforates. The more shards you have, the more damage you do. I like this a lot more than I expected. There's this fun little combo where you build up shards, perforate, and then recharge perforate with skill force flip over. And then you can perforate again. It's big damage, but you have to be pretty fast to pull it off. If you get delayed even a tiny bit, you cannot recharge perforate in time and you lose out on damage. The shards you spend also have lifesteal, and this gets even stronger when you're low health. This gives the weapon a lot of sustain, and it makes it really fun to use in open walls. Damage-wise, the Necro Spear actually pulls ahead of several other Necro power weapons, but it is pretty easy to mess up the combo and end up doing worse. I think the spear is a little fun, but I definitely understand why a lot of people prefer the safer, easier to play Necro weapons. Pick this weapon up if you like a bit of a challenge, or if you want to have an awesome time surviving in open walls. Next, let's talk about the Ranger Spear. Maybe that's a bit of a strange ordering, but I want to make a comparison with the Necro Spear. This is another power damage weapon, and that means that just like Necro Spear, it has a lot of existing weapons to compete with. Just like most other spears, it's got its own unique mechanic. The 5 skill gives you stealth, and most of your skills have a sneak attack version. I think this is actually quite interesting, and it opens up a whole new playstyle in PvP and Worlds vs. Worlds. But in PvE, I feel like this weapon doesn't really have too many advantages over Ranger's other power weapons. It doesn't really do more damage, and whereas the Necro Spear has lifesteal to set it apart, the Ranger Spear doesn't really have its own big selling points. I guess it's nice to be able to stealth past things in open worlds, but that's just about it. I do actually like the animations of this weapon. It feels very smooth to use, and the auto attacks can dynamically switch between ranged and melee. But it just feels like this weapon lacks that killer feature to use it over other weapons. Most of my ranger friends are just sticking to what they were playing before. It is a bit of a shame, and I think this is probably my least favorite spear, but there is a pretty good foundation here. With some tweaks, this weapon might end up a lot better. Now let's discuss the Mesmer Spear. This might just be my favorite. I really like this weapon. The Mesmer Spear is once again a power damage weapon. This means it mostly competes with greatswords. But unlike the greatsword, this weapon is melee. It does do more damage than greatsword, so it pretty elegantly makes both weapons relevant. If you can easily be in melee range, bring your spear. And if you know you're going to be ranged battles, bring greatswords. Mesmer Spear has some gorgeous animations and it hits really hard. There's the Mind the Gap skill, which you want to hit with the outer edge for more damage. There's also skill 5, which then refreshes Mind the Gap. If you hit Mind the Gap, you get Clarity, which powers up your next spear skill. This makes for a pretty fun rotation where you're trying to order your spear skills in a smart way. The animations are beautiful. The weapon feels very fluid. It hits hard. There's a fun minigame. This might just be my favorite Mesmer weapon ever. If there is one tiny piece of criticism I have, is that it can be pretty hard to keep track of whether you have clarity. If you somehow miss Mind the Gap, you don't get clarity, and it might lead to you missing out on a powerful skill. When I play this weapon, I just kind of assume that I will have clarity, because it's really hard to see mid-combat whether you have it or not. You could almost say that I would like some more clarity. I apologize. Let's move on to Thief. Oh my gosh, y'all. Thief Spear is so freaking cool. You basically have two different skill chains that you can move through. You always start with one of two lead attacks, which then flip over to two follow-up attacks, and then finally they become two finisher attacks. This gives you different ways of moving through your skills depending on the situation, and it makes Thief Spear really fun to use. The optimal way to play most Thief weapons is to spam one single skill over and over. This is because of the way initiative works. You kinda want the most damage per initiative, but the Spear does a really good job at countering that. And in my opinion, it's probably the most fun Thief weapon out there. It is a blast to play, and it actually reminds me a lot of the new Viper class in Final Fantasy XIV, where you also progress through multiple combo stages. The weapon does a lot of damage, but for the first couple weeks, it was plagued by a bug that made it kind of annoying to play. For some reason, your own auto attacks could reveal you before you could even do your own sneak attack. So you would go stealth, and then sometimes your sneak attack would just be gone before you even had a chance to use it. It was very awkward, and it was even worse if you had quickness. Fortunately, this bug was fixed literally as I was making this video. Good job, Revenant. Now that it has been fixed, I'm really excited to give the Thief Spear another try. Now let's talk about the Engineer Spear. Unlike most other weapons we have talked about, this is not a power weapon, but a condition weapon. It is melee and it's actually very easy to use. Definitely one of the easiest spears to use effectively. Your 2 skill makes your current target focused, which then powers up your other skills when you hit that target. Minigames like this are kind of a pattern with the spears, but it works pretty well here. Skill 3 summons a lightning rod, which you can then later launch. Skill 4 is CC and skill 5 is a big epic explosion. I had a pretty good time playing this weapon. The animations look nice and does pretty decent damage, but this weapon can end up feeling kinda basic. The focus mechanic isn't too interesting, and if you're trying to do an optimal rotation, it doesn't actually end up being that different from pistol. You kinda just end up pressing 3-2 instead of 3-4. This weapon isn't bad by any means. It is very strong, and Connie Mech with Spear is probably one of the easiest DPS builds to play. But in my opinion, this weapon is not quite as exciting as some of the other spears. It gets the job done just fine, but it's just not as much of a game changer as some of the other ones. I think a lot of the other spears are just a little bit more exciting. I do still recommend playing it though. You will do a lot of damage with this weapon. Speaking of a lot of damage, let's talk Revenant Spear. Honestly, saying that the Revenant Spear does a lot of damage is probably underselling it. At the expansion launch, Revenant Spear was easily the most overpowered weapon the game has ever seen, while being also very easy to play. It was so OP that Arena just put out a patch nerfing it. The weapon is definitely more balanced now, but it's still one of the highest damage weapons in the game. It does have a downside though. It does take quite a while to get its Connie damage going, so it's not super great for killing lots of squishy mobs, like for example in Fractals. I actually quite like the core design of this weapon. It's all about your 5 skill. This skill does damage, but it also builds up stacks of Crushing Abyss. Other skills on your weapon recharge skill 5 faster, so it's all about getting as many 5 skill costs as you can. Once you have 3 stacks, you can unleash them by swapping to a different weapon. I love the idea of this mechanic. You spend some time with your spear, build up stacks, and then move on to your other weapon sets. Unfortunately, the spear is so incredibly powerful that it doesn't really ever seem worth swapping away from it. If anybody is weapon swapping, they're swapping from spear to another spear. It is a little bit awkward. They made this whole swapping mechanic and people just aren't using it. Maybe that will change in the future. For now, this weapon is really good, and that definitely helps make it feel fun. The Warrior Spear was one of the spears that I was initially not very excited about, but having played it a bit now, it actually surprised me. Hold on, clearly I gave this video the wrong title. You won't believe these spears. Spear number 8 will surprise you. A Warrior Spear definitely feels like the most vanilla spear of the bunch. There are no minigames or gimmicks here. This is a power spear weapon that you throw, and it does damage. That's it. It doesn't bring too much to the table in terms of interesting mechanics, but Warrior has always been about hitting enemies with weapons. This is your basic spear thrower archetype, and Warrior actually kinda needed a new ranged power weapon, so it works quite well. The Warrior Spear is very strong on both Berserker and Spellbreaker, and despite its lack of a minigame, I do actually think it's pretty fun. I played a whole bunch of Spear Spellbreaker, and my Twitch chat has finally stopped talking about Hammer SPB. They're now all talking about Spear SPB. On paper, this weapon doesn't have that much going for it, but once you try it, it's just quite a lot of fun, and it's not too difficult to pick up. Definitely give this one a try. And then for our final spear, the Guardian Spear. I was actually not very excited about this weapon, even less so than the Warrior Spear. I tried it out a bit in the beta, and I just didn't really see where it would fit in with my builds. The weapon has some support, but it didn't necessarily seem like it had enough to be a great pick for heal firebrands. And damage wise, it didn't really seem that incredible either. Well, it turns out the answer for this weapon was Wolves versus Wolves. Guardian Spear is amazing at Wolves versus Wolves zerging. It's got resolution and resistance, which are very high value in that game mode, and also your general DPS buffs and healing. When I tried this weapon in Wolves v Wolves, it immediately clicked and it finally made me excited to use it. It also brings back the old Guardian loot stick auto attack. I already know the Labyrinth is gonna be filled with these. It's a blast to use in Wolves v Wolves, but apparently it can also do pretty good damage in PvE. Its sustained number isn't super incredible, but it's really bursty. Apparently Spear Dragon Hunter can now outburst a Saw Beast. This makes it really strong in content like Fractals, and it also makes it really good in open worlds. I haven't really tried Spear Dragon Hunter yet myself, but it's definitely on my list. Do not sleep on this weapon like I did. It's actually a lot better than I thought. And with that, we have now discussed all 9 new spear weapons. As you might have been able to tell, I quite enjoyed these weapons. There are some tiny pieces of criticism here and there, especially with the Ranger Spear, but overall, I've been having a great time trying out each of these spears. In general, I would rank the set a little bit higher than these solo weapons, and I think that with some balance tweaks, they could end up being even better. Honestly, I think it's gonna be pretty hard for Revenant to top the Janthir Spears with their next expansion. I am very curious to see what they'll do, and of course, I will be here to give you my thoughts. If you want to see me mess around with the spears, definitely check out my Twitch stream over at twitch.tv/thevalency. I stream this game 5 nights a week and I am always down to chat. Also, subscribe to the YouTube channel if you enjoyed this video. I've got a lot more Janthir content coming up. Thank you so much for watching and I will see you next time.